Vermont Workers Center, along with Migrant Justice here in Vermont, and the UE are part of the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. And because of that, we have a few special guests in town from our network at Grassroots Global Justice who are joining us and have been with us actually all day. For folks who don't know, some of you have been here all day, actually in a big planning meeting for a big event we're putting on, People's Convention and Just Transition Assembly on April 30th and May 1st, 2016. So mark calendars. So I'm just going to start by giving a few shout outs to all the groups and people and organizations that made it possible to be here today. And if I forget someone, you should let me know. Actually, before I do that, can I ask, is anybody, if anybody's not okay with having their picture taken or being on camera, we're gonna have, the event's gonna be filmed, and Denise from the People's Media Project is gonna be taking pictures. Denise is back there waving her hand. So if you don't wanna be in any pictures or video, just let Denise know, and she'll make sure that you're not. Cool? Cool. Okay. So thanks so much to folks at, maybe we could do like a quick cheer and round of applause for everybody at the Vermont Workers Center. Woo! Migrant Justice, who's surrounded. Green Mountain Self Advocates. Woo! Vermont Center for Independent Living. 350 Vermont. Woo! Rising Tide Vermont. Woo! Vermont Interfaith Action. Woo! The UE. Who are we? UE. The Vermont AFL-CIO. The Peace and Justice Center. The NAACP. The Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island. Worcester Roots. And Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. And the Climate Justice Alliance. And, did I forget anyone? And the Vermont Human Rights Council. Cool. Okay. So I can just say a little bit though for myself as an organizer with the Workers Center. It's super duper important that we're all here today, and actually the conversations that we've been having all day are not just about solidarity, and not just because we care about, not only because we care about each other, and not only because our struggles are interlinked and interconnected, but because we actually recognize that there's no way we can win the fundamental transformative change that we are all trying to win if we do not work together. And we're not fighting for little things, we're not just fighting for better wages and working conditions, or for health care, or for less pollution, or fewer pipelines in Vermont. We're actually trying to change the whole system for the whole world, so that we have a society that's actually based on the vision that our communities have, and that's going to require building interconnected, lasting relationships in our movements that are strong and ongoing. So that's part of why I'm excited that we're here today. I am going to introduce our panelists, and one of them has to leave a little early tonight. So we'll make sure that he gets to go first. But first we have Ananda Lee Tan, who was most recently with the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, regional coordinator, and Ananda has been an activist and organizer and rabble-rouser for over 2 decades, working on anti-war, forestry, agriculture, climate, energy, trade, and labor justice campaigns around the world. And during this time, he also planted trees and organized labor unions, and currently Ananda is working with the Climate Justice Alliance, so we're glad to have you here. I'm going to introduce everyone, and then we'll hear people talk, but welcome. We also welcome Will Copeland, who is an organizer and cultural worker from Detroit. He works on EMEAC's leadership team and is as the Climate Justice Director, and he served as one of the local coordinators for the 2010 U.S. Social Forum, organizing volunteers and all the activists that came to that community during that time. He's also worked as an organizer in the Detroit to Dakar delegation and the World Social Forum held in Dakar, Senegal. And he has lots of connections with the healing justice movements of Detroit and nationally, and is currently working on the D. Blair Theater space in the Cass Corridor Commons in Detroit, which I got to go to a couple years ago for the GGJ membership assembly. And you could check out also, as I mentioned, Will is an artist and has some amazing mixtapes and some, we can, I don't know, maybe he can give us some information later about how to hear some of his work. But we also welcome Helena Wong, who is the national organizer for Grassroots Global Justice Alliance and is the former executive director of CAB, Organizing Asian Communities in New York. And she has been an organizer in low-income Asian immigrant communities, fighting police violence and community development and land use, and fighting gentrification, and has led delegations to China, meeting with organizers who do work around land rights there. Through GGJ, she's actually helping develop the World March of Women chapter in the United States, which is pretty amazing. So we'll get to hear a little bit more about that. So I know y'all are eating, so sorry to interrupt you. But I want to take a second to ask you all to just share briefly a little bit about why you are here and what brings you to Vermont for this. And why, and more specifically, why are you here for this event? Like, why is it important? We call the event What We Dare to Dream. Why is it important to dream? What does that mean to you? Why is it important to imagine a vision of the world we're trying to build? So why don't we start with Ananda?
Well,
can I pass this to you?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I feel what you said at the opening, that we're in this together, because that's the only way we'll win, is the reason why I'm fundamentally here. Last year I was strolling down, actually right after the People's Climate March, late one night. I think I was returning back to our hostel, and I was walking down the street, and a couple of city workers had opened up a junction box, and all these wires were popping out, like a gazillion of them. But I was looking at this maze of wires, this junction box up on a telephone pole, and it really made me realize, the complex systems we've built, and how they need to be unpacked. If we're going to change the system, it's going to take a hell of a lot of work, a lot of figuring out, and we need to start now as to really learning how we actually do that, block by block, community by community, one utility system after another. But it's not just utility, it's like entire systems that we have bound together that are oppressing the earth, exploiting people, and exploiting the natural resources of this earth, need to be unpacked and reassembled to serve people and planet. And really, it's that complexity that makes me feel that we don't have any time to waste. We need to be assembling like this and talking about what are those complicated solutions that we need to start cultivating in our communities, in as much time as we can spare.
How's everybody doing? Good. I was thinking of a story, which is a story that I've heard a couple different times when I was reading different books or hearing different speakers. And a summary of the story goes like this. It was told by, kind of the people that claim that they're very rich, and they're trying to show you the things that you need to do in order to get rich. And what they say is that it's the A students are very good scientists and inventors, and they discover a lot of amazing things about the world. And the B students are very often the salesmen. They may be the fast talkers, and they go and sell different things, and they get their commissions. And the rich person in this speech said it's the C students that own the companies, and they hire the A students and the B students and make a buttload of money off of both of them. And I tell this story because sometimes we have these goals, and these goals are the goals that are given to us by the system. And we think that the goal is the A. the goal is this thing that's defined by the system, you know, this is what you need to focus on, this is what you need to dream. And we may be closed to the way that we're fitting in somebody else's plans just by executing the dreams that have been handed to us. So I really appreciate the depth of the just transition work, and I think that it can always go deeper and deeper so that we can figure out how to decolonize, so that we can figure out how to liberate, so we can figure out where are these dreams, where are these goals coming from, are they really our dreams, and we can keep pushing them, questioning them, until we really get a freedom that not only us but our ancestors can also be proud of.
Hey, so I'm here, one, because I'm a fan of Vermont, but also because I actually started doing organizing work in New York around gentrification, policing, housing. So the work that I did was primarily racial justice organizing. And then in 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit. And in Chinatown, which is right next to Wall Street, the lights were out, there was no electricity. And we found ourselves in a position of doing frontline relief work, right? And so I went into the buildings to see how our tenants were doing, and they were like, oh, hey, when are the lights coming back on? You know, are the schools gonna be open tomorrow? Like, they just had no information. And right after Hurricane Sandy, the emergency relief people, Red Rock, none of them were around. They came a week later. So in the first few days, we were doing a lot of relief work. And I knew, like, just because of our membership in GGJ, that what we were going through, and also from organizations that had gone through Hurricane Katrina, what we were going through in New York was that immigrant communities were being left out of any relief work, relief that was happening. And two, that the climate disaster is not a natural disaster, right? And so I'm lucky that I started working for GGJ, and I feel like when I was in CAV, while we were doing the relief work, we were like, this is like unsustainable. It was insane. But then afterwards, we were like, okay, but we have to go back to organizing tenants, and we have to go back to organizing around police brutality, and we were trying to figure out, well, how do we do this climate work where all of a sudden everybody in the city was talking about resilience projects and greening everything, and then we were like, but wait, there's a disconnect. And so for me, just doing this work around just transition is trying to figure out how do we actually bridge these racial justice, economic justice issues, and thinking about, well, and what is the vision that we actually want to get to, and how are we going to get there together?
Thank you. All right, so what we're going to do, just so folks can see the path ahead, is I have one more question for each of the panelists, and then a couple more, and then one more question that they're all going to answer. And then, if we have time, we're going to ask everyone else to engage in the discussion as well, and we'll do a little activity. So, but first, I'm going to pass it back to Ananda. And my question for you, Ananda, is, so the event is about a just transition, and it's called What We Dare to Dream, a Just Transition. What does just transition mean? And you talked a little bit about this with us earlier today, but I think a lot of us are thinking about this piece that Helena just mentioned and that you all just mentioned about what is the connection between climate justice and rights and in our organizing.
So, one of the things when I was first thinking of the question, I thought of what we should really call a just transition is, we should just call it common sense. Because, and I was thinking of my mother, I'm from India, where my mother moved back to India to spend her last 20 years. And while I was still in my formative years, I remember her always telling me that if you want to protect the planet, if you want to save the earth, you need to really seek the knowledge of those that are closest to the earth. You know, the people who grow our food, the people who look after all our ecosystem services, the keepers of the river, the people who know, the migratory patterns of birds, the people who know how to build us homes, from the materials that are available in our local ecosystems. And this really goes to, I think, what a just transition is about. It's the fact that just transition embodies the belief that if we're going to bail ourselves out of this ecological crisis, this economic crisis, this crisis that is really hitting us like unimaginable speeds and scales, we really need to seek the wisdom, the leadership of working class frontline communities around the world, of indigenous knowledge, of the people who are impacted first and most by the floods, the storms, and the droughts. Not so much the scientific community that have also been doing their job in kind of raising the alarm, but really don't have their solution at hand. And one story I'll just quickly state that I usually share with young people looking at getting involved in climate change issues is that imagine you are standing on a beach, a couple of buddies, and your friend on your right happens to be a marine biologist, or an oceanographer rather, an ocean scientist, and your friend on the left is a local fisherman. And the three of you suddenly realize that you're watching a tsunami approach, a massive tidal wave that's going to just flatten you and crash into you in a matter of minutes. And your oceanographer buddy runs off to the left, and your local fisherman buddy heads off in the other direction. Who do you follow? And I think that's the question we're all faced with in this crisis right now. Who do you follow? It's a very clear-cut question, because where science and technology and a Eurocentric academic, perspective on this crisis is leading us is in a very different direction than where grassroots frontline communities, are holding the fort. And hence our CJA motto we came up with for the People's Climate March last year was, "It takes roots to weather the storm." We need to seek the wisdom of those most impacted by the crisis, because therein lies the solution that's going to bail out the whole planet.
All right, so my next question is for Will. And I think one of the things that came up a lot in our conversations today as we were doing some exchanges and planning as communities here in Vermont is the struggle for racial justice. And it's on our minds more and more every day, and more I know that we here in Vermont and in our organizations are recommitting ourselves committing and recommitting ourselves to the struggle for racial justice, and the movement for Black lives around the country has been a big inspiration and call to action for us all. But the question that I want to ask to you is about how do we fight racism and white supremacy as part of our fight to end capitalism? Can you speak to how these systems are interconnected and what it actually looks like to be fighting them together?
Y'all doing all right? Good. Ananda gave me a very good jumping off point with this metaphor that he gave, and it is the question of who do you follow? I'm gonna ask that question, who do you follow if the scientist is white and the fisherman is black? Who do you follow if it's a group of scientists that have nice suits on and lab coats, and they got this certain amount of money, and the fishermen, they might look kind of dirty, and the breath might smell like fish, and they just literally got their hands down from out the river? Who do you follow? And so I think that the question of racial justice is very much related to this question of who do you follow. It's one thing when you imagine that it's yourself or a homogeneous society or something like that. It's another thing when you really push yourself and see the differences, and you also see how people have been left out by this society. This question of racial justice, there's some pros and some cons. What I mean by that is the discussion around, too often it is collapsed into a discussion around police brutality. And the question of racial justice, while police brutality tells a number of tragic stories, it leads people to think about individuals. And it leads people to think about, oh, can this individual survive in America? Can this individual not survive? But coming from Detroit, which we call a global black metropolis, there's also the question of communities and nations. And so when we talk about who do you follow, it becomes a very deep question when it becomes a group of people who are confident in their African, in their indigenous identity, and are not trying to assimilate into an American identity, but are trying to say, we want the ability to hold our own identities and to hold our own way of lives and to gather the resources to build our own communities. Then who do you follow? Do you only appreciate people of color when they want to be in your thing and assimilate to your thing and follow your ways? Or do you say, you know what, this is a valuable thing, we're gonna build, we're gonna have solidarity. I'm not asking you to join me or for you to fit in or for you to communicate the same way I do or whatnot. So this question of who do you follow is very relevant. And as far as people of color, as far as people from African descent, I really want to reformulate the question from the individual, which so often is like the fly and milk syndrome, in which you look for that little one who's going to fit in, but you assume that the background is white, which is an unsaid assumption, to what is really a new society, which in many cases is an old society. What does that look like? As far as just transition, as I said before, I was very much affected by the work that I've been able to share with Black Mesa of the Dene or Navajo Nation. And one of the things that Jihan Giran, who's one of the organizers there, one of the things that she said is, for her and her people, just transition is not just about jobs. It's about protecting their way of life and then creating work that falls into their way of life. The thought that came to my mind is, when was the last time that you've seen people of African descent come out and say that? When was the last time that you seen us say, we have a way of life, we have a spirituality, we have a being that we must protect, and I don't care if you get money, that's central. The money and all those other things will come afterwards. So building with the indigenous people has given us a visibility of a new center and a new way of being centered. Centered in our own being, centered in our own healing, centered in our own ancestry. And then we'll build the economy around our ways of being with each other. And please note that there are people of all sorts of races living in the global Black metropolis. That's why it's global, but it's also Black, and it's also a metropolis. I was reading my last couple comments. I was reading some books. One was talking about the Yoruba people, and it was talking about back in the 1400s, there were missionaries, and they went into Yoruba land, and they were astounded by the amazing cities that they found with over 200,000 people. And I've read this a couple times, and what this showed is that there is indigenous urban ancestry for African people. So often we think of indigenous as being a farmer and growing, but we also have an indigenous urban landscape, an indigenous urban ancestry. And that's something that I want to do more research, and it's something that's very important to me as well. The last thing that I'll say as far as healing and just transition is there's a lot of work to be done on all of our healings. There's a deep European healing that needs to be done as well, as far as the identity of the many peoples that have been conquered by the European empires, and how many people of European descent have been forced to emulate the French or the English when they had other ancestries. There's thousands of years of oppression and thousands of years to trick many people of European descent into identifying and to think that they're of the same people as a foreign minority ruler class, which is now called the 1%, but that also has ethnic ties. Some of the conspiracy theorists talk about bloodline, which really relates to different ethnicities and ancestries that conquered other European ethnicities and ancestries. So this stuff about ancestry and spirituality and touching the earth, you don't have to appropriate a Native American. You don't have to dress up like somebody else. This is something that we all have in our heritage. We all have in our lineage. all of our ancestors can reach out and talk to us. We don't have to look at, so I don't have to be Indian and say namaste and do this and do that, you know, that's to get spirituality from somewhere else. It's a journey that we all can take, and we can put that journey with our spiritual journey, and that can be a valuable part of our work. It's a valuable part of our work in Detroit, and I'd love to talk more about you, and I probably will touch on it at later points in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much. So I know Ananda has to leave us now to catch a plane. Do you have any last words for us? One thing we were going to ask the panelists a little bit later was if you had any advice or inspiration that you wanted to leave with the movements here in Vermont. Anything else you want to say before you leave?
Well, well, one thing I'm so happy to be here because I've been hearing stories of the great work you do from afar, and to come and hear of ways in which groups here are collaborating across movements, across issues. And I think this is where, I mean, if the rest of the country were in this kind of a place to be able to engage each other with such honest, respectful dialogue, I think we'd all be much further ahead. So I'd like to thank you all for all the work that you do. One thought I did have is sometimes movements require a lot of negotiation. Because as we try to build a movement that is all-inclusive, that involves everyone, we actually have to have these difficult discussions about working at the intersections of race and gender and other forms of justice that keep us divided, and unpackage issues of power and privilege. One little snippet I have before I run out the door, and my apologies for that, is that when we started negotiating our involvement as environmental justice and frontline community groups with some of the big green groups around the New York Climate March last year, one of the decisions we took early on is not to get bogged down, because they outgunned us in terms of their staff and their resources, but we made it very clear that we needed to have a principled relationship. So we got agreement that there'd be a collaboration around the Jimenez principles. So principles can be very useful, especially for the grassroots, because it's not so much campaign goals, or strategies, and objectives that really create real systemic change, but it's principles, protocols, and practices that build movements that then we can leverage for the kind of change we need. Wow. And part of what we agreed to was collaborating on a narrative of the march, which really told a story of bottom-up systems change. And it was a subversive way to kind of get some of the big green groups to agree to our theory of change, but it really was embodied in the banners that led the march, and really saying that, okay, we're going to acknowledge that the people on the front lines of the crisis are the ones who are leading the change. They're at the forefront of the change that needs to take place. Following that, we need to have workers and their collectives and their unions really work closely with these communities to build the systems that are going to replace the present systems. So the fact that the workers can build the new economy, you know, is something that they have to state loud and clear. And the unions really like that. They hadn't been approached by Sierra Club and 350 before with that kind of a proposition that, hey, you guys build us a new economy that's going to bail us out of this crisis. And then finally recognizing that in the labor movement there's issues of class and race and injustice, historic injustice. And so recognizing that there's those folks who get their, like I said earlier, who get their hands dirty in building the new and feeding us, in looking after our children and cleaning up, you know, all the waste that we generate in an industrial society. Those are that's the labor that we need to turn to and really both remunerate for all their services in protecting the planet, but also, you know, see as leaders in the creation of the new. And so we have the solutions was the third line banner that we decided, where all the folks working on food justice, working with small farmers and farm workers, working with all those folks not represented by the AFL, the traditional labor movement could march behind. So I just want to say put it out there that you guys have so much amazing stuff going on. We'd love to hear your stories, and I look forward to seeing how you help us frame both the direction we're going to go and how we get there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so my next question is for Helena, and it's a similar question. It's actually about how we fight for gender justice? How do we fight against heteropatriarchy and for feminism and gender justice as we are in our struggle for just transition and fighting against a capitalist system? And if you could tell us about that and maybe a little bit about your work with the World March of Women.
Great. Okay, so really quickly, the World March of Women is a global feminist action network. So it's made up of basically local organizations that are part of national alliances in their countries, and then the national alliances are part of the World March of Women. And the World March of Women puts out calls to action for women to take action around 4 different themes. The themes are peace and demilitarization. Oh, that fell? Thanks. Peace and demilitarization, women's economic autonomy, violence against women, and common goods and public services. So the World March of Women organizes actions around these 4 themes. And in the World March, so in GGJ, we had a deep dilemma about why we would form another women's organization here in the US, because frankly, there's tons of them. Right, and so what we came to are that what the World March of Women helps us to do is 3 things. One is that the World March of Women recognizes a diversity of feminisms, that actually the mainstream feminist movement doesn't represent the different ways that communities of color, indigenous communities, have practiced feminism, right? And so that there's a diversity of feminisms that we want to lift up in the US chapter of the World March of Women. The second piece is that what we see in the feminist movement and in the women's movement is a division around gender justice, right? And so around especially gender nonconforming, trans women, women who are not born biologically female, there's a divide in the community about, are these women real women? And we want to say no. We want to say no to that kind of differentiation. That actually queer folks and gender nonconforming people and trans women have been part of the feminist movement and are doing leading a lot of the work and experience patriarchy in a lot of the same ways that everybody else does, right? And so. That was the second. And then the third reason why we felt like it was important to have a U.S. chapter of the World March of Women is around an internationalist perspective. That actually, I'll tell this story. When we were in Tunisia, both in 2015 and in 2013, people came up to us and asked us about Hillary Clinton. And they asked us about Hillary Clinton because she's seen as a feminist for the U.S., right? And then they were like, yeah, no, my reaction exactly, what the hell? And really, so she's seen as a feminist, but then she, like, as Secretary of State, went around and bombed, like, all these different countries. And so they were like, is she the face of feminism for the U.S.? And we said no, that we actually believe in a feminism where we don't actually go to war in the name of liberating women in other countries, right? That we are actually in solidarity because the issues that women work on in other countries are the same issues that we work on here. And so then the U.S. chapter of the World March of Women kind of holds these 3 pieces, and I think that differentiates us a little bit from kind of the mainstream feminists and other women's organizations. So I wanted to veer a little bit into kind of talking about how women are talked about in the social justice movement. Because I think that, a lot of organizations in this room work around climate, work around, I think there's some housing maybe, workers' rights definitely, migrant justice. And then I feel like what I hear in the movement broadly is that women are generally, when we talk about our issues, we always say, and women are impacted by these issues. And then that's it. Right? So it's kind of like women are an add-on when we talk about these issues. And I think that it's a problem, right? Because when we talk about women, when we only mention women, we actually don't talk about how the capitalist system is patriarchal in its core, right? And how those 2 things, capitalism and patriarchy, wouldn't survive without each other, right? Along with racism, right? And so I think it's really important for us to talk about how the same people who are the climate criminals, who are the robber barons, who are the people the owning class, are the ones that are really that are at the root at the root cause of why we have why workers don't make enough money, and why property values are so high, and why there's global warming, right? And so. Yeah. So also, I think I also wanted to make a direct connection between capitalism and women's bodies, because there is a direct connection. If capitalism had its way, then we would be dependent on them for water, shelter, food. Oh wait, we kind of already are, right? And so basically the capitalists have exploited Earth's resources to make us pay for things that we think we need, and things that we actually do need. But then we pay for it with our bodies by working long hours to maintain this lifestyle, right? Also by what we put into our bodies, and also and how that manifests in a lot of the diseases and cancers and diabetes that people have, right? And then they make us pay more for what's good for us: organic food, water, I mean, air. Like it's insane how we're paying more for things that are supposed to be natural. And the capitalists have done this. And so women's bodies, and actually all bodies, are affected by capitalism in a very particular way. And then the other piece is that I think is patriarchy helps capitalism accumulate more. Right, and so as women, we have so many voices telling us that we should be like this, we should look like this, we should behave like this. It's always more, more, more. Like we just need to do more to be better women. And satisfaction is not really about replenishing ourselves or replenishing the earth. It's really about satisfying the needs of others, right? So our labor satisfies capitalism, and our bodies are regulated and controlled, right? And what's jacked up is that some women then make the same mistakes and force these ideas on other people, right? How other women should look like, or who is a woman, right? And so these are patriarchal ideas that tell us what women should look like, behave like, who to love, right? And capitalist ideas that say that some work is more valuable than others. And so we have to reject this because they're very connected, and we have to reject both, right? So I'm going to wrap up. In GGJ, we've been talking about reclaiming feminisms at the grassroots. And for us, that means being clear about the connection between patriarchy and capitalism. It means that when we're fighting for women's liberation in Palestine or Iraq or Cambodia or Honduras, that we're actually fighting US imperialism. And if we are fighting US imperialism, then we're fighting the wars abroad, right? We're fighting the fact that there are wars abroad, and we're fighting the wars at home that are being done to us in our communities, in our bodies. And so, yeah, I think I'll just end there. Yeah. So this is, I think, my second or third time in Vermont, and I'm really happy to be here and to have seen the work of the Vermont Worker Center over the past 5 years, actually. And so I'm just really honored and privileged, and feel really privileged to be here. I think that there's two things I want to mention. One is just around the idea of just transition. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I hear the words just transition now all over the place, and it's becoming much more popular. And then I've also heard, at least in New York, there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, like I believe in just transition, and I'm going to go build a community garden, and I want to form a co-op, I think. And so I just want to stress that just transition is not. It's about systems change. It's really about systemic change, and it's really about justice. Justice for what's happened in the past, and reparations in a lot of ways, right? And so when we talk about community gardens and worker co-ops, that's great. But we also need to be talking about how are we actually challenging the system? And so just have that in your minds as you're planning your stuff around just transition. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Sanoa and Sheila are part of a delegation that we've been pulling together to go to Paris in December of this year. December of this year. Oh my gosh. Okay, great. So GEJ, along with the Indigenous Environmental Network and Go South Rising and the Climate Justice Alliance, we're bringing a delegation of 75 people from the U.S. to Paris to basically protest the climate conversations that are happening there in December. And so I don't know if you guys know, but every year the UN does these Conference of Party conversations. They're the UN Climate Convention for Climate Change. Wait, UN Convention. Thank you. I keep messing it up, and I work for GGJ. And so, yeah, so the conversations happen every year. This is the 21st year, hence it's called the COP21. And we've known already through 20 years of conversations that governments are not going to hold corporations accountable. And we already know that even though they're talking that for the first time that there'll be something that the governments are actually going to come up with some plan and actually agree on something, we know that it's not going to be very good. So Obama already has kind of, with the Clean Power Plan, already kind of gave us a peek into what some of the things that he's thinking around for Paris. So all this to say is that in GGJ, we've been working with social movements in the Global South, and the social movements are all have also been talking about what their ideas of the alternative to capitalism is. So, for example, in Bolivia and Ecuador, they have this framework called Buen Vivir, right, a good life. In the Basque Country and what is part of France and Spain, they have this alternative called Alternativas. And so there are different experiments that are happening all over the place. And in the US, we're calling it just transition, right? So all this to say is that different social movements are converging in Paris, and we're going to be doing some actions there. We're also going to be holding down a women's assembly and a women's direct action, and so also making sure that we're including that piece in the Paris activities. I'm very excited about it. But right now we're in a period called the Road to Paris, and so there are a number of activities that are happening in the U.S. as part of this broader conversation. So I just want to put in your calendars October 14th as a National Day of Action around climate deniers. And so I believe that that 350 Rising Tide are already planning stuff for October 14th. And then the People's Climate March, which the People's Climate Movement, which came out of the People's Climate March last year, is helping to pull together all of the different actions that are happening in different places. So if there are actions that are being planned, I hope that you guys are in conversation with each other to think about how you guys can contribute to that conversation. The other thing is GGJ is the Road March of Women Committee in GGJ is hosting a Twitter town hall on women and climate. So that we can build out that analysis more. And then we're also doing a targeted Twitter campaign to Obama and probably John Kerry, where we're trying to tweet 1,000 tweets to them in an hour, right, around women and climate and our demands going into Paris. So October 14th is one date. November 28th, 29th, for those of you who are not going to Paris, and it's also after Thanksgiving, it's going to be an International Day of Action. We don't know yet what people are calling for, but that's just another day to have in your minds. And December 12th, at least in Paris, is going to be the big activities. So we might also call for some stuff there too. On that day. And then what we're bringing, the Indigenous Environmental Network, GDJ, CJA, and Gulf South Rising, is a petition of 5 demands, and I'll just say the 5 demands and then I'm done. Okay, no, cool. You're good. Okay. So we're bringing these demands to Paris, and in Paris we're targeting the U.S. delegation. But the 5 demands are mandatory, not voluntary emissions cuts, right? To leave fossil fuels in the ground. The third one is to reject fracking, nuclear power, carbon markets, and other dangerous technologies and false solutions. to strengthen the inclusion of human rights, particularly the rights of indigenous peoples, and then to support community-rooted solutions, including local and regional economic structures that support the production of new energy, right? So these are the 5 demands that we've started rolling out in August that we're going to take to Paris. And then in Paris, we're going to also be talking about what happens after Paris. So I hope that you guys stay in conversation with us through the Worker Center and Migrant Justice. Thank you for having us.